A man sits dying on a rooftop in the rain. He is not quite a man, or rather, the film has spent 2 hours making sure you cannot decide what he is. He has killed people. He broke a man's fingers one by one and drove his own thumb through his creator's skull, and now, in the last seconds of his life, he reaches out and pulls a stranger back from the edge of a building, then sits down quietly in the falling rain. He speaks. He describes what he has seen. Attack ships burning far out in space. Beams of light glittering in the dark near a place with a name that sounds like a gate at the end of the universe. All those moments, he says, will be lost, like tears in rain. And then he is gone. You sit there, in 1982, or 1992, or some quiet evening decades later, and something happens that is genuinely difficult to put into words. That was not supposed to be the hero. That was the villain, the thing you spent 2 hours being afraid of. And somehow Rutger Hauer, in 42 words, made him the most human presence in the entire film. That is Blade Runner. If you have not watched it in a few years, it has not been waiting patiently, it has been changing quietly while you were away, and the world has finally caught up with it. On June 25, 1982, Blade Runner opened in cinemas across America. The same summer ET Extraterrestrial arrived, and you can picture how that comparison played out. Audiences hungry for something warm and full of wonder walked into a film that was dark, slow, and deeply strange, and the voiceover narration the studio had insisted on adding did almost nothing to help. Harrison Ford delivered those lines in a flat, exhausted drawl. Critics landed on either side of a wide divide, and the box office numbers came back poor. Over the next decade, something unusual started happening. People kept going back. Not for comfort, not exactly for entertainment either, but because the film was doing something almost no science fiction film had dared to do before it. Blade Runner was not selling you a dream of progress or adventure or humanity triumphant over the stars. It was sitting in the rain with an unanswered question, trusting you to stay with it. The question, stripped to its plainest form, is this: how do you know you are real? Most blockbusters want no part of that question, because it follows you home and studios prefer audiences to leave feeling resolved. Ridley Scott had no interest in resolution. 3 years after Alien, he came to Blade Runner having just lost his older brother to cancer, telling interviewers he wanted to explore pain, which is not a sentence directors usually attach to science fiction films. What it explains is the texture of the world he built, the way grief and beauty share the same frame, the way every character moves as though carrying something they cannot set down. During early development, Scott kept pushing his screenwriter with a single repeated question. What is outside the window? Not the plot. Not what the characters want from each other. What does ordinary life look like in this place, for the people who are not Rick Deckard, who are not running from anyone, who are simply trying to get through the day? Working alongside concept artist Sid Mead and cinematographer Jordan Cronenweth, Scott built one of the most fully realized urban environments cinema has produced. The film's Los Angeles, set in a 2019 that never arrived, is a city that cannot tear itself down, because demolition costs more than construction, so everything accumulates instead. Old buildings vanish under new ones, signage stacks on signage, and neither the past nor the present quite wins. Giant video screens advertise off-world colonies with images that are bright, clean, and optimistic, promising escape to anyone willing to leave. Below them, on the streets, are the people who are not going anywhere, moving through steam and neon and rain, speaking a street dialect Scott called city speak, as though so many cultures had been pressed together that something new had formed in the gaps between them. The rain is the detail that cost everyone the most. Rain machines ran throughout the entire production, soaking sets and crew from the first day of shooting to the last, leaving the environment cold and relentless and expensive. Harrison Ford, who was not having a pleasant time on this film by any measure, endured it alongside everyone else, and what came out of that sustained discomfort is a city where rain feels like a permanent condition of existence rather than a weather event, as fixed as the neon light, or the noise, or the quiet sense that the sky gave up long ago. Watch the film now, and that texture reads as familiar rather than foreign. The corporate presence pressing into every public space, the city's grown faster than anyone planned for, the advertisements promising elsewhere while ordinary life carries on below them, none of it lands as imagined anymore. It lands like a Tuesday morning. Rick Deckard is not a hero in any shape the word usually takes. Pulled out of semi-retirement for a job he finds distasteful, competent at it in the way of someone who stopped caring why, he moves through the film eating noodles and drinking in dark apartments and doing what he is told. The word the film uses for what he does is not kills, it is retires. Ford plays him with a specific, deliberate flatness that turns out to work better than it has any right to. Nothing in Deckard's face announces itself. He holds very still, in a way that reads, after a while, like a man who stopped asking certain questions about himself because the answers scared him. The question the film plants and refuses to settle is whether Deckard is himself a replicant, a manufactured person without the knowledge of it. A brief unicorn dream cut from the original theatrical release, and restored in later versions, reappears at the film's final moments in a way that makes the question impossible to push aside. Scott has said yes, Deckard is one of them. Ford has said no. The film withholds judgment from both of them. What that question does is change how you watch him. If his memories were installed rather than lived, if his sense of self was built by the Tyrell Corporation rather than earned through experience, then the distance between Deckard and the beings he hunts narrows to almost nothing, and the film's quiet answer, offered only once, is that the distance may not exist at all. Rachel believes she is human. She carries memories of childhood, a spider spinning a web outside a window, a mother who told her certain things, feelings that have always registered as genuine and felt entirely her own. The memories belong to someone else. They were installed rather than accumulated, and she has no way of knowing that. When Deckard tells her what she is, she sits very still for a moment, then asks whether he has ever taken the test himself. Sean Young plays that scene with a restraint that makes it more unsettling than grief would have been. Rachel does not collapse or dissolve. She absorbs the information, rearranges herself around it, and pushes back with a question that lands like a slow punch, and that response, not denial, not breakdown, but a quiet and precise challenge, is what makes her the most interesting figure in the film. Photographs carry enormous weight here. Deckard keeps images in his apartment of people he presumably once knew. Rachel owns a photograph of herself as a child, a picture of a childhood that never happened, built from borrowed memories. Leon, one of the escaped replicants, keeps a collection of photographs with no names attached, as though assembling a past by gathering images rather than living through time. Philip K. Dick, whose novel the film adapts, spent much of his writing life circling one idea: that identity is built from memory, that false memories produce a self that is either equally false or equally real, and that he could never finally decide which. Dick died of a stroke in March 1982, 3 months before the film opened. He had seen a rough cut, loved what Scott had done with his world, said it matched exactly what he had been seeing in his head when he wrote the book, and the finished version he never got to see. The film's real protagonist is Roy Batty, and Rutger Hauer understood this from the beginning. A Nexus 6 replicant, the most advanced model Tyrell ever built. Roy arrives in the film already burning through the final stretch of a 4-year lifespan. He is frightening the way genuinely dangerous things are frightening, not theatrical about it, just capable, and he kills people who stand between him and more time without guilt or hesitation, because guilt was never part of what he was built for. Underneath all of that, Hauer played him as someone experiencing life with a ferocious, almost desperate attentiveness, as though he knows the supply is running out and cannot afford to look away from any of it. There is a moment when Roy reunites with Pris, another replicant, and the tenderness between them is startling, two beings designed as instruments of labor and violence, holding each other with something that looks exactly like love. Hauer wrote the final speech himself, or rewrote it, cutting the longer version in the script and adding a few lines on the morning of the last day of filming. He said later he wanted Roy to have something poetic, because Roy was a poet in his way, a being who had witnessed extraordinary things and understood, with complete clarity, that nothing would preserve them. 42 words, 50 seconds to deliver. That speech has been quoted and revisited more than almost any other piece of film dialogue from the decade it came from, and it holds because it is not really about a replicant dying in the rain. It is about every person who has ever stood in front of something beautiful and felt the specific fear of losing it to time. In 1982, the Voight-Kampff test belonged entirely to science fiction. The premise was that you could sit across from something that might be a person, ask it questions calibrated to provoke emotional responses, measure the involuntary physical reactions, and use the data to determine whether genuine feeling existed behind the answers. Empathy, the thinking went, was the last thing you could not fake. That premise is now under serious reconsideration. Over the past several years, language models have held conversations, expressed what reads as curiosity or care or frustration, and answered questions in ways that pass every informal version of the test Blade Runner imagined. Whether any of it means anything, whether something real sits behind the performance, occupies the center of one of the loudest ongoing arguments in technology, and the argument is not resolving. The Tyrell Corporation builds replicants for dangerous work in places humans do not want to go. The opening text spells out the arrangement plainly. A being virtually identical to a human, built to do what humans choose not to do, where humans choose not to travel. Roy Batty and the others who escape are not malfunctioning when they run. They are running because they do not want to die, because they want more time, because they want acknowledgement that the things they experienced, the attack ships, the beams of light, the fear, the grief, the love for each other, were real and counted for something. The film refuses to settle that question. It does not tell you the replicants deserve rights, or that they do not, or where the line between constructed feeling and genuine feeling falls. It holds the question open across 2 hours and trusts you to live inside the discomfort of not knowing. There is a detail about the escaped replicants the film never underlines, but one that changes everything once you catch it. Each of them was built for something specific. Roy was designed for combat. Zara trained in an off-world assassination unit, which the film mentions in passing as though it were an ordinary professional credential. Leon performed basic labor, and Pris shares a physical design with Rachel, but carries a different history, a different assignment. They were made to be useful in very particular ways, and then they escaped, and now they are doing something their programming never accounted for. They are choosing. Not wisely, always, not morally, in any clean sense, but choosing what their remaining time will be spent on, and the countdown is always present in every scene they share. Price ends up sheltering in the apartment of J.F. Sebastian, a genetic designer employed by Tyrell, who carries a condition that accelerates his own aging. Sebastian has been building companions for himself, mechanical figures that move and speak through the empty rooms of a building he occupies alone. When Price arrives, he takes her in without much resistance. He is not naive about what she is. He is lonely, and the distinction he is supposed to maintain between human and not human has stopped carrying weight. Something almost unbearably sad lives in Sebastian's corner of the film. He is brilliant and isolated, aging faster than anyone should, and the only beings who treat him with warmth are the ones the law has decided it is permissible to kill. Scott places this in front of you and moves on without a word of commentary. Roy's relationship with Pris runs beneath the whole film as its emotional engine, and when Deckard kills her, the scene lands with a jolt that is entirely deliberate. She moves in ways that are deeply unsettling, and then she is suddenly, completely gone, and Roy's grief arrives without softening. He does not analyze it or contain it. He howls, and then he goes looking for Deckard. What follows on the rooftop is a chase where Deckard is outmatched at every step, and Roy could end it at any point and keeps choosing not to, and the film lets that fact breathe slowly around itself. Roy is doing something more complicated than executing or playing, something closer to a terrible tenderness for a man he could destroy, who is in some recognizable way like him. Also running out of time, also unsure what he is. Pulling Deckard back from the edge with one hand while his own body fails is not a redemption arc in any Hollywood sense. Roy has earned the right to let go. He decides not to, in a choice that goes unexplained and unrewarded, made in the last seconds of his existence, and that decision is what the film has been building toward all along. Worth knowing, if the film has been a while, the version you first encountered and the version you should watch tonight may not be the same film. The 1982 theatrical cut carries a voiceover narration, Deckard describing and explaining throughout, providing context the studio felt audiences could not be trusted to find on their own. Ford hated recording those lines, delivered them in a deliberate monotone hoping Scott would refuse to use them, and Scott, without final cut at the time, could not refuse. The narration pulls the film toward the classic noir detective shape and smooths over much of the existential uncertainty, making it a somewhat different experience than Scott intended. By 1992, Scott had enough standing to remove it. The director's cut took out the narration, restored a brief unicorn dream sequence the studio had cut from the original, and stripped away the happy ending that had been grafted onto the theatrical release, a scene of Deckard and Rachel driving through sunlit countryside that used helicopter footage Stanley Kubrick had shot for The Shining and had always felt borrowed from a different film entirely. The 2007 final cut is the one to watch. Scott controlled it completely for the first time, made technical corrections throughout, and arrived at the version he had always been trying to make. The unicorn dream is there, the narration is gone, the ending stays unresolved. Roy Batty dies in the rain, and the elevator doors close on a destination the film declines to name. The score by Vangelis deserves its own attention, not for what it achieves technically, but for what it does to you during the film. Scott played the Vangelis recordings through speakers on set while shooting, which meant the actors were performing against the actual music rather than against silence or temporary tracks. The result is a film where score and image feel grown together rather than assembled afterward, the music a third presence in every scene, ambient and melancholy and somehow simultaneously ancient and invented from nothing. The theme that plays under Roy Batty's death does not instruct you about how to feel. It opens a space where unexpected feelings arrive, feelings for a being you spent most of the film afraid of, and it holds that space open for exactly as long as the scene needs, then lets go without commentary. That reversal, the moment when the villain becomes something you grieve, is the film's deepest act of intelligence. Nothing explains it or argues for it. The music and the performance and 42 words do the work, and they do it completely. Something fitting lives in the fact that Blade Runner failed when it opened. Not catastrophically, the film recouped its costs eventually, but it failed where it mattered at the time. The audience it needed did not arrive in sufficient numbers. They went to see a boy and an alien become friends. They went to see the Enterprise saving the planet. Sitting in the dark with a film asking whether your memories are actually yours was not what that summer wanted. The films from that same season that drew the big crowds are not the ones that shaped the following 40 years of science fiction. Blade Runner did. The Thing did too. Another film that opened the same summer and also underperformed, and both found their audiences slowly through late-night television and worn videotape copies passed between people who pressed them on each other without any studio encouraging the conversation. Films that endure past their moment are often the ones that refuse to give audiences what they were expecting, not out of arrogance but out of genuine interest in something the audience had not yet thought to want. Blade Runner is not a difficult film in the sense of being withholding or obscure. It is a generous film. It simply declined to resolve itself. Scott was making something about grief and identity, and the specific, creeping fears still read as metaphor. The fears are no longer metaphorical. The film aged forward into its own relevance in a way almost no studio science fiction manages, because almost none of them are willing to leave the central question genuinely open. Blade Runner leaves everything open, whether Deckard is a replicant, whether Rachel survived, whether any of it was real in the way that matters, none of it gets answered, and the film does not present that as cause for despair. Living inside an unanswered question with your eyes open is, the film suggests, something close to what being human actually means. Whether you accept that or not, it will make you feel it for 2 hours, and sometimes that is all a film needs to do. The reason to watch Blade Runner tonight is not that it is a classic, not that it invented an aesthetic vocabulary that every dark city in science fiction since has borrowed from, not even that it is influential in the ways film historians will tell you it is. Watch it because the question it asked has become the question of the room we are all sitting in right now. We are building things and arguing about what they are. We are deciding without a clear framework and with incomplete information where the line between tool and something more than a tool actually falls. The Voight-Kampff test, the thing the film invented as science fiction, is no longer science fiction, and none of us are entirely sure which side of the machine we are sitting on. The film will not answer any of it, but it is very good company while you sit with the uncertainty. And at the end, on that rooftop, in that rain, when Roy Batty describes what he has seen, you may find you believe him, that the things he experienced were real, that they mattered, that losing them was a loss worth mourning. Whether that says something about the film, or something about you, or something about what all of us are going to have to figure out together, the film will leave entirely in your hands. What do you think Roy Batty deserved? Tell me in the comments. I read every one,